Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Digital Empathy Lounge brought to you by Anthrolytics. If you hadn't come across the podcast before, we look at the best and next practices in experience management, and especially what great experiences should look and feel like. And today I'm delighted to be in conversation with Lucy Allen, who's the director at Trifecta Consulting Services and an expert specializing in recruitment and interviewing skills, employee benefits, and retention. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Peter. How are you today?
Looking good, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
before we begin, Lucy, there's a number of topics I'd love to discuss with you, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? So take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Lucy Allen. I am the Director of Trifecta Consulting Services. I am a consultant that specializes in three areas, hence the name Trifecta, which stands for a group of three wins. The areas I'm involved in are headhunting, search and selection, so helping organizations find the right people for the roles in their organization. I also provide recruitment training, so that is selection of those particular candidates, the interview process, and the management of the candidates moving forward. So I offer that to organizations internally to train their managerial staff. And I also offer an EB matching service, which allows organizations to find the right employee benefits for their employees by looking at the different nuances within their business and their demographics and matching the right services to those people. So those are three areas that we get involved in. So we find, we recruit, and we retain as far as the business is concerned. So that's the areas I get involved in. I've done that because I've experience within search and selection and headhunting myself, working for FTSE top 100 companies like Vodafone, Sony, Panasonic, General Motors finance arm. I have also had 10 years experience within employee benefits, where I've dealt with organizations like Pfizer, HSBC, and also small to medium companies. So it just puts me in a good position to be able to find the right solutions for any company that I work for.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lucy. Now, sounds like we could cover the entire employment cycle, but let's start at the beginning then. So, you, like me, and probably everybody else, has been through the interviewing process, either interviewing candidates or being interviewed. And we know that the process can be challenging. So, what can we do to improve it? And what can we do to improve effectiveness to make sure we are getting the right candidates?
Absolutely. What you generally tend to find is that with any managerial position or people that are recruiting within businesses, very rarely have they been trained in interview skills. You are promoted, you are expected to recruit your replacement or indeed recruit a team. This normally happens outside of your job specification and outside of your normal working practices. So really what we need to do is make sure you've got some basic skills to be able to do that as effectively as possible, because it can be really stressful just for the interviewer and for the interviewee. So really the first area that I would actually advise to improve the process is have a very clear indication of exactly what you're looking for, not just on a skill set, but on a cultural basis as well. What values is this person going to bring to the business? And if you're placing an advertisement or you're going through a recruiter, however the method that you've actually decided to use, you need to be very decisive about which person you're selecting to come through the process. So I would always recommend to anybody that I'm working with to make sure that when you're going through that process and you have that clear indication, that you take a maximum of 3 candidates forward to the interview process. Especially when you're placing adverts, it can be very tempting to take more candidates forward and think, well, I can just do one more, or that person looks interesting. But realistically, what you're doing is you're increasing your own stress load. In addition to that, it's very difficult for you to go through and prepare and manage that process effectively. So I would always suggest that you take a maximum of 3 candidates forward. And if you're sifting those people in the right way, then you should be assured that all of those people you're bringing forward will have the skill set to be able to perform that role. So that's really what I would be the first thing that I would insist upon. The second area would be to make sure you prepare before you go into that meeting. The one thing that I've noticed in interviews that I've actually been involved in is that somebody who's unprepared is constantly looking down at the CV, trying to construct their next question, when actually what they're not doing is listening to the candidate and connecting with that candidate when they're going through that interview process. And that is so important for you to be able to understand, have you got that right person in front of you? Are you listening to the responses that they're giving to you? So always prepare. So read the CV, go through into areas that you want to talk to them about. Definitely don't go down the road of challenging every area of the CV, which some people do. That's not really an effective way of interviewing somebody. But go through and look at all of those areas that are salient points that are related to the job specification, any questions you may have. But then look at what they do on a personal basis. Find out a bit more about them as an individual. That way, then you can identify the cultural and the value fit. So that's really important from that point of view. Plus the fact you're not going to be looking down at a piece of paper, because no one likes talking to a forehead. It's disengaging. So it just means that what you need to do is make sure that you've got that area covered. What I'd also say is that when you've got those questions put forward and you've got them prepared, then you can ask questions and counter questions. You know, curiosity really is something that breeds connection within two people. And by doing that, you're probably going to get more honest answers from that individual, because they are connected and you're finding out a little bit more about them. And people like to talk about themselves. So it's a good way of being able to get it under the skin and find out a bit more about that particular interview that's coming forward for the interview. If you are going on as an interviewee and you're going into that meeting, obviously there's the obvious answers of research the company, which is great, but also research the person that's just conducting the interview for you, because from that perspective it means that you can ask them questions in relation to their background and their experience, and really sort of get under the skin of what makes that person tick, especially if there's somebody that you're going to be reporting to and you're going to be working directly with them, because it's very important. I think it's more obvious now, and we've just come out of a situation where it's a candidate rich environment. That's slowing down now, but what you generally tend to find is you'll have somebody that you're interviewing, and as an interviewee they may have applied for more than one job role. So you really want to start engaging those people into the organization. I've always said as an interviewee, to any candidates that I've been speaking to, is ask that person what they love about working for the organization. Ask them that question, rather than what is a standard is, why should I work for you? Find out why they love working for the company, because what you'll end up finding is they'll say things that will connect with you as to an organization that you want to be part of. And if you've got that happening from both sides, then you're going to gain that not just connection, I keep using that word, but you're going to look at that job role as something that you see yourself in. And in addition to that, when you go back to the interviewer, if they're talking about why they're passionate about that business, they're really encouraging these candidates to have a better viewpoint of the organization and getting their interest to think, this is the company I want to choose. This is the company I want to work for. And if you get that 3-candidate process and you have all of them feeling that way, then that means that you can choose which candidate you want to bring on board, which one out of that 3 you want to bring on board. What I also say on, in addition to that, from a candidate management point of view, is I think it's really important to give very good feedback to those candidates. And what I mean by that is we are taught to be polite. We are taught to not offend anybody or hurt their feelings. And so sometimes these conversations can be difficult to have. But at the same turn, we're seeing a rise in ghosting from employers and employees or interviewees alike. And really that needs to stop happening. And if you can manage the process better, as I teach in my courses, if you manage the process better, It allows you to give honest feedback, speak to those candidates, tell them why you chose another candidate, be honest, because that's really what people want. They want honesty, not polite. They don't want to be treated politely. They want to have honest feedback so they can grow and develop, moving on to the next interview that they might go to. But in addition to that, the reason I say manage this process effectively, and the smaller amount of candidates you have, the easier it is because I tell my clients, do not burn bridges. You shouldn't burn bridges. The ghosting thing just works against everybody. If you've got these 3 candidates that you've gone through the sifting process in a really effective, robust way, and they're all capable of doing that job, by maintaining that contact with that candidate, what that allows you to be able to do is, it may be you have a shift in your business and the following week you need somebody else to come back in, rather than having to go through that process all over again. You're starting to build yourself a candidate base that you can actually then draw upon and say, you know, you weren't successful that last time. I hope you still love this company. We might have a position that's going to be effective for you. And it just means that you have a better way of being able to solve any recruitment issues that you have in the future by looking at it from a perspective of long term, even if you're not actually employing that person, if that makes sense. It's for me, that process and interjecting that process from start to finish results in a better outcome for the client, for the candidate. It's more inclusive. It gives you more future planning, the ability for future planning, and really for my money, it's the best way to further the recruitment process internally for organisations.
Thanks very much, Lucy. So a lot to take on board there. Now, I've often heard the expression from organisations that we hire for attitude, we can train everything else. But do employers really pay attention to how their employees feel once they're in the workforce?
I think that employers do have this viewpoint that they want that to be true, but are the systems in place to actually facilitate that? You need to be gathering regular feedback from your employees and actually putting that feedback into action for that to be effective. You also need a very strong learning and development section within your business to be able to do that and have that scheduled for those employees. There is nothing more disconcerting of walking into an organization with the viewpoint that they're going to train you in certain areas and that training never happening. What you will do is you'll end up with this situation we talked about with quiet quitting. You'll have people that will just stay until they can get something else and they're out the door. And that really does go against what the recruitment process is supposed to be about. We're supposed to be bringing people on board for your future as a business, not to actually bring them on board, forget them and leave and see them walking out the door. That makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. So if you're going to use that philosophy, you have to have the goods to back it up. And I know that we've talked about psychometric testing, and there's a lot of organizations that are very reliant on psychometric testing. But the problem with psychometric testing is it is very reflective of how you feel right now, the emotional side of you as an individual. So if you're having an incredibly bad day, your scores will be one way. If you're having a really good day, they'll be completely different. So it's really sort of like we've said, it's in the moment feedback. I mean, there's 2 examples that I've had on a personal basis for psychometric testing, one of which was I was applying for a particular role and they started with a whole bank of psychometric testing that went on for half a day. The results came back for my psychometric testing. I was 19 at the time. And they came back and I almost didn't get an interview because the results of certain parts of the test showed my independence, one of the highest scores they've ever had. So the initial question was, could I work as part of a team? That would mean I'm not a team player. Luckily, they did give me an interview, and I was able to explain to them at that time that I left home at 16 years old. So I was fiercely independent and very self-sufficient. But of course, I could work as part of a team. But you could see how that selection process can be skewed if you were to actually rely on psychometric testing. So I think that in isolation, these things are you know, you can see why companies would utilize psychometric testing, or the philosophy of we can train for everything else. But unless you're backing that up, you should never make that statement, because you're instantly putting people on the back foot and making them feel like they're not inclusive within the business and they are being ignored. There's a very famous expression that I like to use, which is don't make decisions for me without me. So you have to regularly check in on your employees and make sure that there's nothing that you're missing, because the cost of recruiting somebody, and I'm not just talking about costs per hire, I'm talking about the knock-on effects, the emotional effects, the motivational effects of the team as a whole, can be so expensive that if you're going to put that in place, then you have to have the strategy to back it up.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lucy. Yeah, great points there. And I think partly it might be down to the way that we've historically incentivized and motivated managers, in that we tend to have a very production-led approach to management. It's the easiest thing to do. So we like things we can quantify and then count, but of course the attitude's slightly different. But let's take this a little bit further. So we've run an effective recruitment campaign. We found the ideal candidate who is ready, willing, and able to take part and really want to contribute to our company. And they land on day one. So we found the perfect candidate. What do we need to do to ensure that we give them an exceptional onboarding experience, and why is it so important?
Onboarding is so essential. It's where you set your stall out to a new starter within the organization. I know that we've all started with companies before and we felt like a duck out of water until you've actually learned the systems, the procedures, the people who you need to speak to, where you need to go to find information to do your role. And what you can do in that circumstance to get an effective onboarding process. I'm a great believer in a round robin approach, in the sense that any employee is just a cog in the bigger wheel. And so what you need to do is find each and every individual that goes in different divisions within the organization, so that person can spend time with them and learn how their cog fits into the higher or the bigger picture. I think that's really important to be able to do that. One of the things I've talked about in a white paper that I've posted on LinkedIn is to, if you were to sort of integrate PR and marketing with your onboarding process, there's a really good effect that I can see that comes along with that. So if you're rewarding employees internally, or you're saying thank you for a great piece of work, or a collaboration that's resulted in a new client or a new division within the company, that should be documented and put onto the website and actually put out into the wider market. Not only are you supporting your brand and actually putting out there that how inclusive you are as a organization, and how supportive you are of your employees. That's the vision you're giving externally. What it also does is that everybody who's researching the company ahead of coming for an interview or ahead of starting with the business, they have sight of all of this information and pictures of those people, so they can put a face to the name as soon as they actually walk through the door. One of the things that I've done with an onboarding process for an organization that I've worked for is I've gone through and gone systematically through the computer system, step-by-step process for this particular organization I work for. So I got all of that written down. What I also did was, when we created the round robin process, is we had photographs of each person, and put that in with a little bio of each person, so that they knew exactly who they were seeing. They didn't have to ask, where are they, where do they sit? It was in the paper that was sent to them ahead of schedule, and they knew exactly who the person looked like, you know. So it just meant that it was more personalized. It was something that allowed the new employee to be able to find who they needed straight away, rather than saying, awkwardly saying, I don't know where I'm going, can somebody help me? It just points everybody in the right direction, and you've got the buy-in of those individuals who are going to produce that initial sort of induction process, if you will, to understand the business better. I mean, that seems really simplistic, but you'll be amazed at how what impact that has for all new starters, because there's nothing worse than starting with a company, sitting in reception, and nobody knows who you are and what you've come to do and where you're supposed to go. That's really demoralizing. So you, by doing these little tiny efforts that you put in and put a pack together for this any particular new starter, you just make them feel like they've already started with the company once they receive it. And I think it's a great way of just sort of easing somebody into the organization.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lucy. I couldn't agree more. I think if we think about employee experience, in fact, if we think about human experience, the way we evaluate it tends to be upon what we expected. So, of course, that early onboarding is where the candidate and the employer get to see whether their expectations are likely to be met. And if they're not, that clearly will lead to quick quitting, as you say, something that's a phenomenon many of us have seen. And in that horrible case, ghosting as well. So, don't even turn up for day one. I had such a bad pre-boarding experience. But I think this is so important. These are typically not the kinds of skills that managers of my ilk, and I'm going towards the end of my career now, but we weren't taught these things. We were taught about how to measure stuff and report measures and read a balance sheet and prepare reports. It's, of course, got more difficult now with more hybrid and remote working. Anyway, we could talk for hours, but I've already got a lot to take care of. So I've got lots of notes. So thank you very much, Lucy. Really informative. And to those watching, if you'd like to take part in the Digital Empathy Lounge, you can find the instructions on how to reach us in the comments. And I'll also try and include a link to Lucy's white paper. But until the next time, thanks very much and goodbye. Cheerio now. Bye-bye.